What's up, everybody? It's Olaf, and today we are taking a look at the Old Realm, a total overhaul mod for Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. So right out the gate, I admittedly don't know a lot about Warhammer as a setting. I don't know the lore, and I apologize in advance if I say anything incorrect. Please don't come for me. I'm not perfect. Per the devs, though, this mod takes place in the age of Karl Franz's ascension to the throne. Now, I'm not exactly sure what this means, but I assume this will mean a lot of faction infighting for power. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing. But if, like me, you don't know anything about Warhammer, the basics are that this is a high fantasy setting created by Games Workshop as a basis for the tabletop Warhammer games. Although you're probably more familiar with Warhammer 40k, there's been a ton of games that have released in that setting. There have been a few Total War games dedicated to the Warhammer fantasy setting. So if you were curious or if you like what you see here, you can always check those out. Now, before we begin, I do want to stress that this mod is still in its early stages. Bannerlord was only released a couple months ago. So obviously it's going to take modders some time to catch up with all the tools available. That said, the Old Realm is shaping up to be one of the cooler mods for the game with its access to magic and really tremendous visuals. Honestly, the visuals were the first thing that I noticed and will probably be one of the biggest things that will set this apart from other mods. The cities and character models are insane, and I've been really impressed with what I've seen so far. Everything feels natural and accurate from what I can tell, and obviously it's made with a lot of love, which is a plus, for things to come. But anyway, for those who might not know what Mount and Blade is, let's go over a brief overview of that before we continue. So Mount and Blade is a sandbox-style game where you control a single character who recruits people to fight for you. That's a deceptively basic description, but it gets far more complex and interesting as you progress. You start off as a weakling, basically just by yourself outside of a village without much renown, but eventually you have the possibility of being anything from a king, to a warlord, to a mercenary, to a merchant, and so on. I don't know why I did those backwards, but whatever. You can do quests for local villages, hunt bandits and mercenaries, compete in tournaments, or even just forge swords for sale throughout the various cities. Honestly, aside from maybe Kenshi or Crusader Kings, it's probably my favorite sandbox game, and a big reason for that is the modding community. Mount and Blade Warband, I think, had some of the best, most dedicated mod teams in gaming. Aside from maybe Morrowind, I can't think of a community that had better mods. Between mods like Gecko Kujo, Prophecy of Pendor, and the Last Days of the Third Age, I've sunk quite a lot of hours, several hundred in this series over the years. So I'm obviously very excited for all the overhaul mods to come, and I do plan on checking them out in the future. And if you have any suggestions for some that you're interested in, maybe one that's already out that I don't know about, feel free to leave that below. Now, before we begin, let's talk about probably the biggest issue this mod has at the moment, and which is a performance problem. And the devs are very open about this in their README. The shaders in this game have some pretty extended loading sequences, especially the first time you load up the game. I think for me it took about 20 minutes for the game to start. That is before I could get to the main menu and do anything. But for others, they said it could take anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours. So that is something kind of big to keep in mind. A couple of the bigger battles that I fought in, because I hadn't seen the enemy types before, the game would have to load that in as well. You do have the option at the main menu to load all the shaders, which maybe wouldn't be the worst idea. But I can't imagine that also wouldn't take a while. So that's something that you're going to have to weigh. Other than that, though, like once the game was loaded and everything was good, I didn't experience any in-battle lag. The only other lag I really saw or stuttering was on the main map when I was in a faction and they were doing a siege across the map. I have no idea why that happened. Didn't really see anything talking about that. Maybe I didn't read it. I'm not famous for reading. But it's also still an early mod, and the scope is huge, so I can forgive these basic little, blips. But let's talk about the mod. So at the moment, the Old Realm has two playable factions. You have men, or the Empire, and you have the Vampires, which are the Sylvani, I think, something like that. Obviously, again, don't fight me. I don't know how things are, but I have to stress, these two factions are pretty polished and developed, and they each do feel very unique in their play style. I would say the Empire focuses more on ranged combat and sort of being defensive, and the Vampires have a lot more knight options, so they're much more focused on attacking, although they don't do as well in sieges as the Empire does. But anyway, I played each of these for about 5 hours, and personally, even with what I just said in mind, I think that I found the Vampires more enjoyable. Obviously, I think once everything is implemented, that's going to change. Like, I love dwarves in fantasy settings, and I know they're being added. Probably, I think, in the near future, if I remember reading right. But I just felt like the vampire magic tree and the ability to raise undead armies from city graveyards made the early game pretty trivial. Whereas with the Empire, I found myself struggling for probably about an hour before I was even able to make it past the low-level enemies, which seemed to be a lot more numerous in this mod. Like, as soon as you start out, like pretty much out the gate, you're surrounded by bandits, which is fine, because I think for the mid-game it makes it a lot better because there's more enemies to attack. Whereas in vanilla Bannerlord, there's not a lot to do in the mid game. It's sort of the low point, I would say. I will say, hearing the crack of gunpowder while you're playing as the Empire is really satisfying, but I probably wouldn't come back to them at full release because I think I would just rather play as like the Skaven or like something unique, you know, something different, exciting. I'm kind of over knights in plate armor. It is a cool setting, but you know, it's obviously why I enjoyed the vampires a little bit more. Now, as far as the general gameplay loop of fighting and earning rep, if you're familiar with Bannerlord, that's pretty much the basics. You go around, you do tournaments, you build rep, you build renown, you become a vassal, or you become a king. That's not really that different. You do have a few more bandit camps that you can clear, and the tournaments do seem to be more frequent because there's more cities per faction, or at least it felt like there was a lot. And they're all a little closer together, so I was doing tournaments a lot more than I think I was in vanilla Bannerlord. Magic is obviously the biggest change, as well as like undead enemies and character models, of course. All of the unique factions are going to have unique character models, so that's, of course, going to be different. But Magic played a huge part in a lot of these battles, and I was able to turn the tide a couple of times in the early game because of it, so I do think that it's something you should check out, even if you weren't considering it. It's really easy to use. Although I couldn't figure out how to switch between my spells, so maybe I'm stupid. If one of the devs sees this and you want to just give me a little hint, that would be cool. Anyway, as of right now, the villages are the only thing that have like unique assets. Like some of the battlefields are really, really cool and they look fantastic. But the cities don't unless you go into the arena where you can sort of see the planned aesthetic of what the devs are going for, which I think is cool. So just something to keep in mind that if you just decide to walk around a city, it's not going to look like it does on the overworld, which is fine. Because if you have ever played a mod like The Last Days of the Third Age, you know what people are capable of in these games. And there's a lot to be excited for it, just not quite yet. There is a weird bug in the game. I know I've talked about some of these earlier, but where the icons have stripes, which the devs talk about if you read the README, and the faces look weird for the vampire lords. This doesn't affect how they look in-game, but just keep that in mind. If it's something that bothers you, I don't think it's something the devs can fix. I think that's a Bannerlord issue, so, you know, don't come attacking them, please. Now, I will say at the moment, there's not a whole lot of incentive to being like a vassal, or conquering a city, or anything like that. If you've ever played base Mountain Blade Bannerlord, then you've probably done this to death anyway, so I can't imagine why you would spend more time doing it unless you just really like playing a vampire overlord that takes over cities, which, I mean, you know, more power to you or whatever. That said, there is some endgame-ish content that's been previewed, which is the Chaos faction. They appear, I think, I don't know, I think it's when you're Rep 2. I don't remember them being there at the beginning of the game, but they basically run around out of their little Chaos gates and they attack villages. And you can attack them too, and I did a couple times, but almost every time they would wipe out like half of my army. So they're pretty strong, they have really tough armor, and they drop really solid loot, and they make nice prisoners. So, I mean, there is a high risk, high reward. You can also attack their Chaos gates and have like a siege. But I never tried this because it looked kind of difficult, so I have no idea if this is even possible to achieve by yourself at the moment. But overall, there isn't a whole lot I can say about this mod, besides that I think it's good so far. Honestly, I think it's more fun than base Bannerlord ever was, so if that's any sort of compliment, there you go. Those 10 hours that I played it flew by, and I probably will check it out for a little while longer just because it is fun, you know, on its own. But if you were looking for a change of pace in Mountain Blade Bannerlord, I would definitely recommend at least trying this out. You know, support the devs, give them some advice, report bugs, anything like that. It's always helpful. And I believe they do have a Discord, so you should join that if you are curious on any progress. And again, if there's any Overhaul mods you'd like me to play or to talk about, feel free. You can leave those below, and I'll be sure to check them out. They don't have to be for Bannerlord. They could be for Morrowind. They could be for anything. Any game that you think I might play, why not? Let's do it. Let's expand our horizons, everybody. But I think that's going to be it for this one. I wanted to keep this video just under 10 minutes. I hope that it was okay. I don't really do these very often, but I'm trying to be better on this little platform that we call YouTube with more than just doing Let's Plays and other things like that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Olaf. This has been The Old Realm, or an overview of The Old Realm, and I will see you in the next one.